Hey guys, it's Luke from Mix It Made Simple, and today I'm going to be talking about the amazing plugin that is Soundtoys Decapitator. Now, the plugin itself is just called Decapitator, and it comes from the company Soundtoys, which have an amazing pack of plugins. I'd highly recommend getting them. You can buy each of their plugins individually, or you can buy the whole pack. You know, if you get the whole Soundtoys pack, say if you had Soundtoys and you had FabFilter, you're basically set for life. If you're looking to explore plugins outside of the stock plugins that come with your DAW, I'd highly recommend Soundtoys and like FabFilter. But in this case, we're talking about Soundtoys Decapitator, which is a fantastic saturation/distortion plugin. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to read a brief paragraph from their manual and talk about it. And then I'm going to go through each of the parameters and explain how the plugin works. And then I'm going to show you in a project how we can use Decapitator to make things sound really, really good, basically. So before we get started, if you're an EDM producer and you're looking to get really good at mixing and mastering, whether you're a beginner or you're an intermediate and you're struggling to get that professional level sound that you're looking for, make sure you look in the description below and book a Zoom call with me. We'll see about getting you enrolled in my course, Mix Immersions. I teach you everything you need to know about mixing and mastering, and there's also a mentorship aspect with it as well to really help you to reach that next level just as fast as possible. So make sure you do that. Anyways, let's go ahead and talk about Decapitator. So first, I'm going to read from the manual. I'd recommend if you get the plugin to go ahead and just read through the entire manual yourself. But just briefly, I'm going to read just the first paragraph, introduction to Decapitator. Saturation. It's the essence of what makes analog hardware sound so musical and pleasing to the ears. The sound of tubes, transistors, and circuitry being pushed to their limit has long been the magic mojo behind recordings of the analog era. Saturation has been used to beef things up, thin them out, give them edge, fry them up nicely, and add warmth, smooth over, pull elements out of the mix, and create signature sounds. From the very subtle to the extreme, analog saturation is an integral part of great mixes. So the way I like to look at saturation and distortion is basically saturation is a more subtle form and it adds kind of a richness and adds harmonics to a sound. And then when you get to distortion, that's when we're really, really pushing it, and it's a more aggressive, it's kind of one of those things where when you hear it, you know it, and I'm going to show you in a second, especially when we use the punish button. And so that's what it is. And what they did was they actually modeled several different analog pieces of hardware, and that's what each one of these buttons represents, which is really cool. It's almost like you have 5 different saturators in one, and I'm going to talk about each one of these when we get to them. But first, let's just start from the left and work our way over to the right and talk about how this plugin works. So drive is really just an input knob. You know, when you push this up, it's going to drive more signal into the Decapitator. Obviously, the more you push this up, it's pretty simple. The more you push it up, the more we're going to be saturating or distorting the signal. Punish is really interesting. What Punish does is it just automatically adds 20 dB of gain into the Decapitator. So when you hit Punish, it's just pushing that signal 20 dB up, and that's when you're really going to hear distortion. And that's if you really want to get aggressive with it, you can put that Punish knob on, and it's really going to it's really aggressively saturate/distort the signal. And so we'll get to that in a bit. And so what Thump does, if you turn this on, it adds a few dB of gain right to where the low cut cuts off, and so it's going to like add a little bit of like thump to the low end. And so if you turn this up wherever the low cut is, it's going to add a few dB, kind of like a little like notch of an EQ up to that signal. And so low cut, what we have here is it's going to be cutting off anything below. If you turn this up, so this is 20 hertz right here, the lowest of the low. If you start turning this up, anything below is going to be no longer being saturated. So if you want to saturate something but you don't want it to affect the low end, you can just go ahead and turn this up and cut out the lows. And so tone is going to be adjusting how dark or bright the signal is. And really what this is, it's just the control of a sloping equalizer. And so if you go to dark, it's just going to be kind of taking down some of the high end. If you go to bright, it's going to be adding in some high end, because, you know, if you think about brightness, we usually attribute that to the high end, like a high end sheen, or like the bright of a signal being brought up the high. Dark is if you were to like, filter out some of the high end, it's going to make it more of a dark sound. High cut This is cutting out the high end of the signal, and so we start up at 20 hertz. And actually, if we have steep off, it's actually more of a slope. And then if you turn steep on, it's going to be just a kind of a really cutting that off. And so, you know, if I lower this, and I'll show you later on, when we lower this, it's really going to start only saturating everything below a certain frequency range. So if we were to go all the way down to 1000 hertz, it would just only be saturating everything below 1000 hertz. And then, like I said, steep just turns that into a steep drop off versus a gradual slope. Output is obviously just how much the Decapitator outputs. I like to have it on, if you put auto here and then you turn up the drive, then it's going to be turning down the output. I don't normally like using auto makeup gain or anything like that, but in this case, I actually do like adding this, because if you don't have this on and you start driving up, it's just going to get louder and louder. And we attribute things louder as better. And so it's kind of nice to use auto and then turn this up, and then it quiets the signal, so then we can really hear what it's actually doing to the signal. The mix knob, just like any other plugin, is just how much we're affecting the signal. So 100% wet is 100% affecting the signal. If we bring it down to 50%, then you know, we get to like parallel processing, and we can really play with this. I like to use this quite a bit, especially in combination with punish mode, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Now, this is probably the coolest part of the plugin, is these different buttons. And I actually wrote up this little Word document. I used ChatGPT to help me summarize each one of these, because in the manual, if you look at the manual, they have a full description of what each one of these buttons does, but I didn't want to go through and read the entire thing. So I just have a brief summary of each one. And this is what makes the Decapitator so cool. And so what they did was they made each one of these is modeled after a different analog hardware. And so A style is modeled off after the Ampex 350 tape drive preamp from the 1950s. Provides a vintage colored sound often used in classic studios like Sun, Stax, Motown, and Chess Records. E style, based on vintage mixing consoles from EMI Abbey Road Studio. Offers a beefy low end with a smooth, airy top end sheen. And I'm going to show you how we can hear that in just a second. N style, after the Neve 1057. And I apologize if I'm pronouncing any of these incorrectly, but modeled after the Neve 1057 input channel using germanium transistors, especially good for guitars, adding a classic Neve character. T style emulates the sound of an overdriven triode tube, useful for adding punch and attitude to various sounds. And then P style models an overdriven pentode tube, provides a different sound from triode designs often used in output stage of amplifiers. So I'm going to bring this over here. And what I'm going to do, one great way to see and also hear what a saturator or a compressor is doing to any signal, so we can bring up a sine wave. And this is great because if I go ahead and turn this off and I just play, what you'll see here is in Pro Q3, a sine wave is only one fundamental frequency. So I'll go ahead and play this, and you're only going to see one frequency pop up. Let's check this out. Pretty much everything else that you play is going to have, the whole spectrum is going to be filled out with harmonics, but sine wave is really cool, and it's only that fundamental frequency. And what makes this cool is now we can add Decapitator to this signal, and then we can actually visually see and also hear what each one of these is doing to the signal. So now if I play this, I'll go ahead and turn drive up, and you can hear what it's doing. Now if I hit punish, let's go ahead and hear what that sounds like. So really that's what distortion would sound like. You're really distorting the signal there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave punish off. I'm going to go up to drive right here. And now so you can see what it's doing, how it's adding these little harmonics here. Watch what happens when we switch over to E mode. Now you see that? See how cool that is? What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go through each one of these, and then just you can visually see and also listen to what it's doing to this sine wave. I'm going to start back at A, go to E, now N, and now T, and now P. That's pretty cool, right? That's quite a bit different. If we go to P to like E, It's more smooth. That's kind of more of a rounded type sound. And so that's really cool, right? So like I said, Sine Wave is a really great way to visually see and also kind of listen to what a saturator or compressor or whatever you're working with does to the signal. Now let's move on to an actual real example of how I would use this on a bass. Let's just turn this off. And I've got this here. I've got this is just the kick drum and a bass sound here, and I've got the Decapitator. Now let's go ahead and then just listen to what this sounds like. It's kind of like a melodic techno little loop we got going on here. And this is what the bass sounds like by itself. So I've got this layered in. I'm using this bass here, which is also really cool. More of the sub from that bass. I'm kind of rolling off some of the sub in this bass. Now let's see what we can do with Decapitator to kind of add some character to this. Okay, so let's just make sure everything's reset. Okay, so we got Decapitator on. Let's just start turning up the drive. Let's see what it would sound like if I go to E. I personally like E a lot, especially on basses. You can hear it's kind of adding some punch to it. Let's go back and forth, turning it off. I'll turn it back on. I can turn up the bright. It's kind of adding some snappiness to the high end a little bit. Let's go ahead and just for fun, let's turn on punish mode. So you can hear what that does. Let's go ahead and just go back to adding some drive to it. And then we have a little bit of bright. Let's go ahead and I'll show you what happens if you use the low cut. See how it's taking out that low end, but I don't want to do that. What if I took out some of the high end? I actually kind of like distorting most of the signal, so I'm just going to leave these untouched, having bright mode. And then now what we can do is I'm going to play the whole thing together. I'm going to leave this how it is right here on E mode, and we'll go back and forth and see the difference that it makes. Let's go ahead and turn it off. Now turn it back on. Maybe I want to put it before the sidechain. Now I like how both of them sound. Unsaturated sounds just fine, but then saturated also sounds pretty cool. And here's how I will show you how I would use like the punish mode, for example. So if I turn on punish, that's a little bit too aggressive. I don't necessarily like that, but what you can do is you can just take the mix knob. Here's it off. We can go to different styles. I really like E and P for this. So I wouldn't necessarily do this to this track, but I just want to show an example of how we can do this to bass. and it really adds like a character and a different sound, or makes it more aggressive and it sounds really cool. So that's how I would use something, use Decapitator on a bass, for example. Let's go ahead and jump down to this drum loop here. I have, if you want to just add some aggression, distortions to some drum loops, we can go ahead and play around with this. I wouldn't necessarily do that, but this is just a way we can do this. So let's go ahead. Let's turn on Punish and see how it sounds. Like maybe add a little bit of the brightness. Let's cut out some of the low end. Turn on thump. Mess with the mix, the dry wet. And one thing you could do as well is if I take the Decapitator, make a if I make an audio effect right with it, well then what I can do is I can go ahead and create a chain, and now we can really get into parallel processing where if I turn this down a little bit, now I've got the unaffected signal, and then I've got the Decapitator distorted signal. I can really turn that up, and then what we can do is I can turn this one down, turn the dry signal up. And that's just one way that we can use Decapitator on our drums or drum loops to add some aggression, add some of that, that saturated sound that we might like. We don't necessarily always do that. I don't really do that a lot to my drums, but that's just one way that we can use it. Okay, the last thing I want to show you, one way that we can use Decapitator is a little bit more subtle, and it's kind of like the way I imagine it is sending your track through, an analog desk or something like that. So back in the day, the mixing console, they'd have their own unique character, and the mixing consoles themselves would add harmonics and character to a sound. You often hear a lot of these older mix engineers talk about stuff like this. And so I have a full track here, and I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I'm going to play a group part of it. But what you can do is you can go to each group of your instruments, and you can just put on Decapitator. And so I've got right here, at the beginning of my mids high group, if I just play it from right here, you can put on Decapitator, put it on a really subtle, I don't even have, I put on E mode, and then I don't even have the drive up or anything. And now if I play it, just go ahead and take a listen here. And if I turn it off, now back on, a little bit of drive. So you almost can't even hear it. It is very, very subtle, and this is the type of thing that you'll start to hear when you get more and more advanced, but it is adding, you can hear that it's adding something there. Even if you can't necessarily hear it really, really well, it is adding something, and it is adding that analog warmth that we all like to hear, that we all talk about and love, to a group of your instruments. And that's one thing that I like to do, is I like to put Decapitator on, choose one of the buttons, maybe put it on another group, and then choose a different button to have a different character, a different sound. And you can do this to different groups of your instruments to add a different color and character to each set of sounds, which overall in the mix is just going to add this really nice, vibrant, all this life and just character to your overall track. And so that's the last thing I wanted to show you that you might not have thought about when using this. Decapitator itself, I think the name almost does it a disservice, because when you hear Decapitator, you just think like, oh my God, I'm going to drive this thing. I'm going to distort the crap out of something. But really, the way they modeled it after analog hardware, you can really use it in a much more subtle way to add that nice, pleasant analog warmth to different elements in your track. And so that pretty much sums it up. That's all I want to do, talk about the Decapitator. I think a lot of the Decapitator, you can just, I would encourage you to purchase it and then just play with it yourself. But I've showed you a few examples of how we can use it, and I hope that helps. I highly recommend getting this plugin, and honestly, all of Soundtoys plugins for that matter. And yeah, I hope this was a good run through and it helps give you an idea of what Decapitator can do. Like I said, encourage you to get it yourself and play with it, and help bring your tracks to that next level sound. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please like and subscribe and do all that stuff, help my channel grow, and I'll see you again next time.